At my twin babies' funeral after they died in their sleep, my mother-in-law said God took them because he knew what kind of mother they had. Relatives agreed. Then my 4-year-old daughter tugged the pastor's robe and said, "Pastor John, should I tell everyone what Grandma put in the baby bottles?" The room went silent. I stood at my twin babies' funeral, my legs trembling so hard I thought they'd give out, when my mother-in-law Beatrix leaned over their tiny white caskets and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "God took them because he knew what kind of mother they had." The words hit me like physical blows, each one stealing more air from my lungs. My name is Cordelia Mitchell, but everyone calls me Cora, and 3 days ago I found my 3-month-old twins, Finnegan and Beckham, dead in their cribs. The funeral parlor in Columbus, Ohio, was packed with relatives who'd come to mourn my boys, but instead of comfort, I heard whispers of agreement rippling through the pews after Beatrix's cruel declaration. "She's right," someone murmured behind me. "Some women just can't handle multiple children," another voice added. My husband Garrison stood right beside me, his pharmaceutical sales suit perfectly pressed, his face carved from stone, saying absolutely nothing to defend me. Not one word. I wanted to scream that Beatrix had tormented me from the day Garrison brought me home 8 years ago. I wanted to tell everyone how she'd criticized every bottle I made, every diaper I changed, every lullaby I sang to my precious boys. But grief had stolen my voice, trapped it somewhere beneath the unbearable weight crushing my chest. My parents, Jeremiah and Winifred, had just arrived from Seattle, but they sat 3 rows back, too far to hear what was happening, too far to save me from drowning in this nightmare. Then I felt a small hand slip into mine. My 7-year-old daughter Delphine, who we called Delphi, stood beside me in her black dress, the one she'd worn to her spring piano recital just 2 months ago, when her baby brothers were still alive, still breathing, still filling our house with their precious cries. She squeezed my fingers 3 times, our secret code for, "I love you," the same signal we'd created when Beatrix's visits became too much to bear. Beatrix's voice grew louder as she addressed the crowd, her gray hair perfectly coiffed despite the supposed grief of losing her grandsons. "Sometimes God shows mercy in mysterious ways," she announced, her voice carrying that false sweetness she'd perfected over the years, like poison wrapped in honey. "These innocent angels were spared from suffering. The Lord knows what's best, and he knew what kind of household they were in." My sister-in-law Nadine nodded vigorously from her seat, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief. Uncle Clifford, Beatrix's brother, actually said amen like this was some kind of twisted church service instead of my baby's funeral. These people had eaten at my table, held my boys, told me what a wonderful mother I was just weeks ago. Now they stood in judgment, jury to Beatrix's prosecutor, while my husband remained a silent witness to my character assassination. Pastor John cleared his throat at the podium, clearly uncomfortable with the turn this service had taken, but even he seemed unsure how to redirect Beatrix once she claimed the spotlight. She donated thousands to this church over the years, bought her way into unquestioned authority, and now she was using my baby's funeral as her personal stage to destroy me. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened next. Delphi released my hand and started walking toward Pastor John with the kind of determination I'd never seen in her young face. Her Mary Janes clicked against the funeral parlor floor, each step echoing in the sudden silence as every head turned to watch this little girl approach the podium. She reached up and tugged on Pastor John's black robe, and when he bent down to hear her, she spoke in a clear, unwavering voice that carried through the entire room. "Pastor John, should I tell everyone what Grandma put in the baby bottles?" The funeral parlor went ice cold. Beatrix's face transformed from false grief to genuine terror in a single heartbeat. Garrison finally looked up from his hands, and I realized my 7-year-old daughter was about to expose a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about how my babies died. 3 months before I stood in that funeral parlor, I believed I was living my second chance at happiness. Our home in suburban Columbus was the kind of place I'd dreamed about as a little girl. 2 stories, white shutters, a backyard with a swing set that Garrison had assembled himself when Delphi turned 5. The nursery I'd painted soft blue with clouds on the ceiling housed 2 cribs, 2 rocking chairs, and more love than I thought my heart could hold. Finnegan and Beckham had arrived after 5 years of trying, 5 years of negative pregnancy tests that felt like personal failures, 5 years of Beatrix reminding me that a real woman would have given her son more children by now. The morning the twins were born, I remember Garrison holding them for the first time, tears streaming down his face. "They're perfect, Cora," he'd whispered, and for once, just that once, I thought maybe we could be the family I'd always wanted. Even Beatrix had seemed softer that day, though she'd still managed to mention that her other son, Clifford's wife, had delivered naturally without any pain medication, while I'd given up and gotten an epidural. Our daily routine had settled into controlled chaos by the time the boys were 3 months old. I worked from home as a graphic designer, my laptop perpetually open on the kitchen table between bottle feedings and diaper changes. My clients were patient, understanding when a video call included baby sounds in the background. I'd found my rhythm, nurse Finnegan while Beckham slept, then switch, design logos during their synchronized naps, help Delphi with homework while wearing one twin in a carrier and rocking the other with my foot. It was exhausting, beautiful, everything motherhood should be. But Tuesdays and Thursdays were different. Those were the days. Garrison traveled for his pharmaceutical sales job, visiting doctors' offices across Ohio and Kentucky, leaving early morning and returning late at night. Those were also the days Beatrix insisted on helping with the twins. "You can't possibly manage 3 children alone," she denounced when the boys were just 2 weeks old, standing in my living room like she owned it. "I raised 3 boys myself. I know what I'm doing." "You need to accept help, Cordelia." Garrison had agreed immediately. "Mom's right, honey. You look exhausted. Let her help while I'm gone." The first time she came over, I found her rearranging my entire kitchen. "Bottles should be in this cabinet, formula in this one. You had everything mixed up." When I tried to explain my system, she'd given me that look. The one that said I was too young, too stupid, too inadequate to know anything about raising children. "I've been a mother longer than you've been alive, dear," she'd said. And that was supposed to end every discussion. Delphi noticed everything. She was 7, but carried herself like someone much older, probably because she'd learned to read the tension in our house like other kids read picture books. She'd started making excuses to stay home from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, mysterious stomach aches that disappeared the moment Beatrix's Lexus pulled out of our driveway. "Mommy, why does Grandma make you sad?" she'd asked one Thursday evening as I tucked her into bed, the twins finally asleep after a particularly fussy day. "Grandma doesn't make me sad, sweetheart," I'd lied, smoothing her dark hair. "Sometimes grown-ups just have different ideas about things. She said you don't burp the babies right, but I watched you and the nurse at the hospital, and you do it exactly the same way the nurse showed you." My daughter saw everything, remembered everything. I should have listened to what she was trying to tell me. The weeks passed in a blur of feedings and criticism. Beatrix would arrive at 8 sharp every Tuesday and Thursday, letting herself in with the key Garrison had given her despite my protests. "The formula you're using isn't the best one," she'd announce. "These babies cry too much. You're not putting them on a proper schedule. Why is this house such a mess?" In my day, mothers didn't complain about being tired. She'd hover while I nursed, making comments about how long it took, suggesting formula would be more efficient. She'd reorganize the twins' dresser, refold their blankets, check the temperature of their bottles, even after I tested them myself. Nothing I did met her standards. Nothing ever had. The night before my babies died, Garrison had called from his hotel in Kentucky. "How's Mom doing with her help?" he'd asked. Not how was I doing, not how were the boys. "Your mother's fine," I'd answered, because what else could I say? That his mother was slowly eroding my confidence, my sanity, my sense of myself as a mother? He'd already chosen his side years ago, and it wasn't mine. If only I'd known that would be our last normal conversation. If only I'd paid attention to the growing dread I felt every time Beatrix walked through my door. If only I'd listened to my daughter's watchful silence and 2 knowing eyes. Thursday morning arrived with unusual silence. My body clock, trained by 3 months of 5 a.m. feeding cries, woke me at 4:47. I lay there, waiting for Finnegan's hungry whimper or Beckham's distinctive grunt that meant he needed a diaper change. Nothing came. The baby monitor on my nightstand showed 2 still forms in their cribs. They must be having their first good sleep, I thought, pulling my robe around me as I padded down the hall to check on them. The nursery door was slightly open, exactly how I'd left it. Morning light filtered through the cloud-patterned curtains I'd sewn while pregnant. I approached Finnegan's crib first, and my world stopped. His tiny chest wasn't moving. His perfect lips were blue. I grabbed him, his body cold and stiff against my chest, and screamed. The sound that came out of me wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul tearing in half. Garrison burst through the door, took one look, and ran to Beckham's crib. "No, no, no, no," he chanted, lifting our other son, trying infant CPR while I called 911, my fingers barely able to hit the right numbers. The operator's calm voice asked questions I couldn't process. "Are they breathing? When did you last see them alive? How old are the babies?" The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes that felt like 6 years. They worked on my boys with professional efficiency, but I saw the look they exchanged, that look that said they were performing procedures for our benefit, not because there was hope. They pronounced both boys dead at 5:23 a.m. Sudden infant death syndrome, they said initially. 2 babies at once was rare, but not impossible. Sometimes with twins, when one stops breathing, the other follows. Beatrix arrived at our house within an hour, even though no one had called her. I had a feeling something was wrong, she announced, pushing past me to get to Garrison, who sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. She wrapped her arms around her son while I stood there like a stranger in my own home. My poor boy, she cooed to him. My poor, poor boy. Not our poor boys, not my poor grandsons, her poor boy, singular, as if he was the only one who'd lost something. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of arrangements I wasn't allowed to make. Beatrix took over everything, bringing her sister Nadine and brother Clifford as reinforcement. They descended on our house like carrion birds, picking through decisions that should have been mine and Garrison's alone. White caskets are too expensive for infants, Beatrix declared at the funeral home. The wooden ones are more practical. Practical? I'd found my voice for a moment. We're burying my babies, not buying furniture. Our babies, Garrison had corrected quietly, the only thing he'd said in hours. Of course, Beatrix had interjected smoothly. But Cordelia, dear, you're not thinking clearly. Let those of us with clearer heads make these decisions. The extended family began arriving Tuesday evening. Each one received Beatrix's version of events before they even saw me. I watched from my bedroom window as she met them in the driveway, talking animatedly, gesturing toward the house, shaking her head sadly. By the time they came inside, their eyes held suspicion instead of sympathy. How does this happen to both babies? Garrison's cousin Renee asked, not quite meeting my eyes. Were they sick? They were perfect, I said. Healthy. Their 2-month checkup was perfect. Sometimes mothers miss signs, Beatrix interrupted. Cordelia's been overwhelmed. I tried to help, but she insisted on doing everything herself. That was a lie so bold I couldn't speak. She'd been there twice a week, controlling everything, criticizing everything. My voice died in my throat when I saw Garrison nodding along with his mother's narrative. My parents arrived Wednesday night, having driven straight through from Seattle. My father Jeremiah took one look at the dynamics in the house and pulled me aside. What's happening here, Cora? Why is that woman treating you like a suspect instead of a grieving mother? She's always hated me, Dad, but now she has an audience. My mother Winifred was more direct. She confronted Beatrix in the kitchen. My daughter just lost her children. How dare you make implications? I'm not implying anything, Beatrix replied with practiced innocence. But 2 healthy babies don't just die. The authorities will investigate as they should. Delphi hadn't left my side except to sleep. She watched everything with those sharp eyes, especially her grandmother. On Wednesday night, I found her sitting on her bedroom floor with her journal, writing furiously. What are you writing, baby? She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Things I want to remember about Finn and Beck and other stuff. What other stuff? She closed the journal carefully. Just stuff I notice, like how Grandma Beatrix pretends to cry, but her eyes are never wet, and how Daddy won't look at you, and how Uncle Clifford and Aunt Nadine believe everything Grandma says, even though they weren't here. I held my daughter close, this child who saw truth while adults chose blindness. Sometimes people see what they want to see, sweetheart, but that's not right, she whispered into my shoulder. Not when Finn and Beck are dead. The truth matters more now, doesn't it? The funeral service began at 10 o'clock sharp on a gray Wednesday morning that matched the color of my heart. I sat in the front row of the Morrison funeral home, my black dress hanging loose on a body that had forgotten how to eat. Garrison sat beside me, but the 6 inches between us might as well have been 6 miles. He hadn't touched me once since we'd found the boys. Not a hand held, not an arm around my shoulders, not even an accidental brush of fingers. His grief had built a wall between us, brick by brick, mortared with his mother's poisonous words. Pastor John stood at the podium, his kind face creased with genuine sorrow. He'd baptized the twins just 6 weeks ago, sprinkling holy water on their perfect heads while they'd squirmed in their white christening gowns. Now those same gowns dressed them for burial, and I couldn't reconcile the memory with the reality. We gathered today to celebrate the brief but precious lives of Finnegan and Beckham Mitchell, Pastor John began, but Beatrix was already standing up from her place in the front row across the aisle. Pastor, may I say something first? She didn't wait for permission, just walked to the podium with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. Pastor John stepped aside, looking uncomfortable but too polite to refuse a grieving grandmother. Beatrix adjusted the microphone with theatrical precision. She wore a black suit that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage, her pearl necklace catching the light from the stained glass windows. She dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, though I could see from my angle that they were perfectly dry. My grandsons were angels, she began, her voice carrying that special tone she reserved for public performances. 3 months of life, barely enough time to know this world, but perhaps that was God's mercy. The congregation murmured sympathetically. I felt Delphi tense beside me, her small hand gripping mine. You see, Beatrix continued, Sometimes the Lord in His infinite wisdom removes innocent souls from situations that would damage their purity. He sees all, knows all. He knows which households are houses of love and which are houses of chaos. He knows which mothers are equipped for the sacred duty of raising children and which are overwhelmed by their own inadequacies. My mother gasped audibly from the third row. My father started to stand, but I turned and shook my head slightly. Making a scene would only feed Beatrix's narrative that I came from an unstable family. I tried to help. Beatrix's voice grew stronger, more confident as she found her rhythm. Every Tuesday and Thursday I came to that house to provide the structure and knowledge that experience brings. But some people are too proud to accept wisdom, too stubborn to admit they're drowning. And now my son, my poor Garrison, has lost his boys because someone couldn't admit she needed more help than she was willing to accept. That's enough, Mother, Garrison finally spoke, but his voice was weak, barely audible. No, son, it needs to be said. God took those babies because He knew what kind of mother they had. A mother who insisted she could handle 3 children while working, who refused proper help, who was too proud to admit she was failing. Beatrix looked directly at me. Sometimes God's mercy looks like tragedy to those who don't understand His ways. Nadine stood up in the third row. Amen, sister. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Clifford joined in. Those babies are better off in heaven than in a chaotic household. My father was on his feet now, my mother trying to pull him back down, but it was like watching an avalanche gain momentum. Other relatives, people who barely knew me, were nodding along, creating a chorus of agreement with Beatrix's monstrous implications. She was always tired, someone whispered loud enough to hear. The house was never clean when I visited, another voice added. Postpartum depression probably, came another speculation. Each word was a nail in the coffin of my character, delivered at my baby's actual coffins. I wanted to stand to scream that Beatrix had tormented me for years, that she'd undermined every moment of my motherhood, that she'd made me question every decision I'd ever made. But my voice was trapped beneath the crushing weight of grief and injustice. Pastor John cleared his throat trying to regain control of his service, but Beatrix wasn't finished. I just pray that if God blesses them with more children, lessons will have been learned. That pride won't overcome common sense again. That my son won't have to suffer another loss because someone couldn't admit their limitations. That's when I felt Delphi slip away from my side. She stood up with the dignity of someone far older than 7, straightening her black dress with careful precision. Her Mary Janes clicked against the funeral home floor as she walked not toward the bathroom, not toward the exit, but directly toward Pastor John. Every head turned to watch this small girl navigate through the sea of flowers surrounding the 2 white caskets. She reached the podium where Pastor John stood, reached up and tugged firmly on his black robe. The entire room fell silent. Even Beatrix stopped mid-sentence and whatever additional venom she'd been preparing to deliver. Pastor John knelt down to Delphi's level, and in that moment my daughter's clear voice rang out through the funeral parlor like a bell of truth. Pastor John, should I tell everyone what Grandma put in the baby bottles? The funeral parlor transformed into a frozen tableau. Beatrix's face drained of all color, her carefully applied makeup standing out against skin that had gone paper white. Her hand flew to her pearl necklace, gripping it so tightly I thought the string might snap. Garrison shot up from his seat beside me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Every relative, every friend, every person who'd been nodding along to Beatrix's character assassination sat in stunned silence. Pastor John stayed kneeling beside Delphi, his pastoral training keeping his voice gentle despite the bomb that had just detonated. What do you mean, sweetheart? What did you see? Delphi stood straight, her chin raised, speaking with the clarity of someone who'd been holding a terrible secret. Last Tuesday, I was thirsty after breakfast. I went to get my juice box from the kitchen. Grandma was standing at the counter with Finnegan and Beckham's bottles. She had Daddy's work bag open, the black one he takes on sales trips. She was crushing pills from his sample medicines and mixing the powder into their milk. You lying little brat, Beatrix shrieked, starting toward Delphi, but Pastor John stood, placing himself between my daughter and her grandmother. Let the child speak, he said firmly. Delphi continued, undeterred. She saw me watching and said the medicine would help them sleep better. She said good grandmothers make sure babies don't cry too much because crying means the mother isn't doing her job right. She said mommy needed to learn that babies should be quiet. Garrison pushed past me, reaching the podium in 3 strides. Delphi, baby, you must be confused. Grandma would never hurt your brothers. I'm not confused, Daddy. Delphi reached into her small black purse, the one I'd let her carry to feel grown up at the funeral. She pulled out my old iPhone, the one I'd given her to play educational games. I took pictures. The phone screen illuminated her face as she swiped to the photos. She held it up toward Pastor John first, then turned it toward the congregation. Even from where I stood, Now on my feet and moving toward my daughter, I could see the image clearly. Beatrix at my kitchen counter, prescription bottle in one hand, medicine crusher in the other. 2 baby bottles lined up in front of her. "There's more," Delphi said, swiping through. "This one shows the medicine bottle label. It says sedative sample and has Daddy's company name on it. This one shows her pouring the powder into Finn's bottle. This one shows her shaking Beck's bottle to mix it in." My legs gave out. I would have hit the floor if my father hadn't caught me, having rushed forward from his seat. My mother was already on her phone with 911, her voice urgent but controlled. Garrison stood frozen, staring at the phone in his daughter's hands like it was showing him the end of the world. Beatrix's carefully constructed composure shattered completely. "Those were just mild sedatives. Babies need to sleep." She never let them cry it out properly. "I was helping. I was being a good grandmother." "You drugged my babies?" The voice that came out of me didn't sound like mine. It was primal, savage, the sound of a mother bear whose cubs had been threatened. "You put sedatives in my 3-month-old baby's bottles? They needed to sleep through the night. You were making them soft with all that coddling, rushing to them every time they made a sound." Beatrix's mask had completely fallen away, revealing the monster beneath. "My boys never cried like that because I knew how to make them sleep properly." Garrison finally found his voice, and when he did, it came out as a roar. "Mother, what did you do? What did you do?" "I was fixing your mistake," she screamed back at him. "You married beneath yourself, had children with someone who couldn't handle them. I was solving the problem." Pastor John had his phone out now, calling for police backup. Several relatives were recording everything on their phones. Nadine had collapsed in her pew, sobbing. Clifford stood slack-jawed, unable to process that his sister had just confessed to drugging infants. Delphi wasn't finished. "I wrote it all down too," she said, pulling a small journal from her purse. "Every time Grandma came over, what she said about Mommy, what she did with the bottles, how the babies acted after they drank them. They got really sleepy and wouldn't wake up even when Mommy tried to feed them. Grandma said that meant the medicine was working." She opened the journal, reading in her clear child's voice. "Tuesday, May 15th. Grandma put medicine in Finn and Beck's bottles again. She used more than last time. She said they needed to learn to sleep like dead babies." Those were her words. Sleep like dead babies. The funeral parlor erupted. People were screaming, crying, shouting. Someone yelled, "Murder!" Others called for justice. But all I could focus on was my daughter, this brave, brilliant child who had documented evil, when all the adults around her had been too blind or too cowardly to see it. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Beatrix tried to run for the exit, but my father and 3 other men blocked her path. She spun around wildly, looking for another escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The grandmother who'd stood at the podium minutes ago, claiming divine righteousness, was now exposed as a murderer. "I was helping," she kept screaming. They needed discipline, structure, not some weak mother who didn't know how to make babies behave. The police burst through the funeral home doors. Detective Patricia Morse, whom I recognized from the initial investigation, took in the scene with professional efficiency. Pastor John immediately approached her, gesturing toward Delphi and the phone she still held. Within moments, an officer was carefully bagging the phone as evidence, while another read Beatrix her rights. As they handcuffed my mother-in-law beside my baby's caskets, she looked at me with pure hatred. "This is your fault," she hissed. "If you'd been a better mother, I wouldn't have had to step in." The police station became our second home for the next 72 hours. Detective Morse worked with a pediatric forensic specialist to fast-track the toxicology tests on my babies. When the results came back, the medical examiner's face told me everything before she even spoke. Lethal levels of sedatives in both boys' systems. The medication was identified as a powerful prescription sleep aid from Garrison's sample collection, never meant for anyone under 18, let alone 3-month-old infants. The dose Beatrix had given them was enough to suppress their respiratory systems until they simply stopped breathing. The investigation uncovered the full horror of Beatrix's actions. Her computer history showed searches dating back 2 months, how much sedative for infant sleep, babies who won't wake up, making babies sleep through night medicine, and most chilling of all, infant overdose how much. She'd been planning this, escalating the doses gradually. The Tuesday before their death, she'd given them 5 times the amount she'd started with. Garrison's world collapsed completely. He sat in our living room the day after the funeral, holding the twins' baptism photo, sobbing in a way I'd never seen a grown man cry. "I gave her access to my samples," he kept saying. "I gave her the key to our house. I told you to let her help. I killed our sons." "Your mother killed our sons," I corrected him, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort him. He'd chosen her over me for 8 years. He'd stood silent while she destroyed me piece by piece. His complicity had created the environment where she felt empowered to do the unthinkable. The trial moved quickly. Beatrix's lawyer tried to claim diminished capacity, that she'd only intended to help them sleep, not kill them. But Delphi's testimony destroyed that defense. My 7-year-old daughter sat in that witness chair, speaking clearly into the microphone, reading from her journal. Every date, every incident, every cruel word about me, every time she'd seen Grandma with the bottles. May 8th, Delphi read. Grandma said Mommy was too stupid to know that babies need discipline. She said, when Daddy divorces Mommy, she'll raise us right. May 13th, Grandma put medicine in the bottles and told me it was vitamins, but I know what vitamins look like, and this wasn't vitamins. May 20th, the last day, Grandma said the babies would sleep so hard tonight that nothing would wake them. She laughed when she said it. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, life without parole. When they read the verdict, Beatrix screamed that we'd all ruined her life, that she'd only been trying to help, that I was the real murderer for being such a bad mother.